Welcome back everybody, my name is Tucker, and in today's video I'm going to talk about some players in the NBA that could potentially make themselves a lot of money this season or lose themselves a lot of money this season based solely on how they play. Now this is a pretty common thing to talk about, right? Because every single year there's big free agents that come up, there's guys that are in contract years, and it's a pretty well-known thing that being in a contract year is a huge deal, and a lot of players do play better in a year in which they know their contract is expiring. But given some of the recent developments about this upcoming free agency class in 2020, I thought it was worth noting to point out some players that are still on the line for some potentially big paydays, but will only really get them if they play well this year. So first up, we're going to talk about Kings wing Bogdan Bogdanovich, and this is a player that's been in the news relatively recently, someone that the Kings were trying to get an extension done with, at the same time also trying to extend Buddy Hield, in which they were successful, but Bogdanovich never got a new deal before the deadline and will now be going into 2020 as a restricted free agent once the summer rolls around. And the reason I think this is interesting is because there's a chance that Bogdanovich is a player that just isn't utilized correctly in Sacramento. They have so many other talented players on the perimeter that maybe Bogdanovich just isn't being utilized to the best of his ability, and there could be another team out there that sees that and tries to go after him with a relatively big deal in restricted free agency. He's a talented scorer and playmaker that should fit in relatively well on pretty much any team, which continues to expand the market on him, which is important because in 2020 free agency, the market for these guys probably won't be huge because there won't be nearly as much cap space, certainly as we saw last summer, or really that we've been used to over the last couple of summers. And that fit also comes in another way because the 2021 free agency class looks to be a huge deal with a ton of big names supposedly going to be out there for teams to get. So they're going to go after a player this offseason and also potentially target somebody in 2021. It's important that the big names that they're getting now, like Bogdanovich potentially, could fit well with another big name or just a big name guy in general that they bring in the 21 offseason, which again increases the value of Bogdanovich. And on the other hand, for the Kings, they might not be all that motivated to bring him back now that they're going to be paying Buddy Hield big money. De'Aaron Fox is going to be coming up for an extension soon, and then Marvin Bagley after that, and they're already paying some other players pretty big bucks on their roster as well, which I talked about in a recent video. So all these factors could come together to create a relative bidding war for Bogdanovich, but it all depends on how he plays this upcoming season. If he expands his role slightly as a playmaker, as a scorer, and as a shooter, he could really be looking at a big payday in the summer of 2020. Moving on now to a player that certainly made a name for himself up to this point, but got a lot of people's attention on opening night, and that is Fred VanVleet of the Toronto Raptors. And again, this is an interesting name because the Raptors have already shown a willingness to wrap up and keep together this young core that they have now post Kawhi, because they signed Pascal Siakam to a max extension, and VanVleet could be the next guy to be paid. 2 off seasons ago now, he signed a 2-year, $18 million deal to stay in Toronto, which has turned out to be a relative bargain for this team, as he really emerged as an incredibly important piece for them, most specifically obviously during their playoff run last year and in the finals. And if opening night is any indication, he's looking to expand on that this upcoming season as well. VanVleet is a good defender, good playmaker, and a good shooter as well, a really well-rounded backcourt player. But my only issue here in terms of him potentially getting a big payday is how well he would fit on another team. I don't doubt that he would fit role-wise on another team, but I'm not sure that he would be as useful as he is in Toronto. They're very used to him. They're very comfortable with him. He knows what is expected of him, and I think there could be a slight tendency to overvalue him as potentially a system player. I don't mean any offense to VanVleet at all. I'm just not sure that he would be as good on another team as he would be in Toronto, which could potentially bring down his value. However, the best way for him to get people to ignore those concerns is just to continue to play the way that he did on opening night as a legit high-level scorer and playmaker with defensive presence as well. And that will not only make other teams interested, but make the Raptors really unwilling to let him walk elsewhere and potentially give him a big deal as well, and just build this team moving forward around Siakam and VanVleet. So he's another guy to definitely keep an eye on. Moving on now, let's talk about probably one of the more polarizing young players in the NBA at the moment, and that is Brandon Ingram, who will go into 2020 free agency as a restricted free agent after not reaching an extension with the Pelicans, just like Bogdanovich didn't reach one with the Kings. And regardless of what you think of Ingram individually, in your own opinion as a player, personally, I'm not a huge fan But regardless of your own opinions, he certainly has the opportunity to play himself into a big payday, whether that be in New Orleans or elsewhere. Now, certainly you would think that the Pelicans would definitely be interested in bringing him back based off the fact that he was one of the bigger pieces, potentially the biggest piece of the Anthony Davis trade that they got back in return, and they don't want a guy like that to walk. And not only that, but they don't really have a ton of long-term commitments on the roster outside of some rookie contracts and Drew Holiday, so seemingly they would have the salary space for a relatively big deal for Brandon Ingram as well. And then when you add into that the deal that Jaylen Brown just signed, who was in the exact same draft class, and those two players have been compared a ton since they've been in the league, a lot of people I'm sure think that Brandon Ingram is a better player than Jaylen Brown, and I would imagine that his agents come contract time over the summer will want a deal bigger than what Brown got for Ingram, and I do think that's a realistic possibility depending on how badly the Pelicans want to bring him back, and of course, as is the focus of this video, how well he plays this season. And again, judging by the deal that Brown got, I think it's definitely realistic for Ingram to expect to get something similar depending on how not only he plays this season, but maybe more importantly, how well he fits in with this roster, with Drew Holiday, with Lonzo Ball, with Zion Williamson most importantly, because this is a team that certainly has talent, they certainly have pieces, but how good they're going to be over the next few seasons is one, going to depend on how well they draft, but also how well all these pieces come together and fit. So maybe more importantly than Brandon Ingram putting up crazy stats this season, showing an ability to fit into this team will be critical for him as well in terms of potentially getting himself a big payday on the court this season. Moving on now to the fourth member of this list, and it's going to be Montrezl Harrell of the LA Clippers. And his situation is a little bit different than some of the other guys that I've talked about to this point. He's going to be an unrestricted free agent just like VanVleet, but we pretty much know what Montrezl Harrell is going to be at this point in this stage of his career. There's some other members of this list that you could argue their value lies in the potential that they could still have, most specifically Ingram and Bogdanovic. Montrezl Harrell is going to be a really good, productive, high-energy big in this league for a really long time, and he is someone that has already proven his value, and hopefully, to him at least, proven his value from a monetary standpoint as well. And I would imagine as well that the Clippers are going to be really motivated to try and bring back Montrezl Harrell this offseason, which could further increase his value in free agency. And the reason for that is this team is pretty limited in terms of how they're going to improve their team moving forward outside of trading some of their players, because they don't have very many draft picks at all over the next couple of seasons. So bringing back players like Harrell is going to be really important to their success. Otherwise, they're just going to get continually worse during this Kawhi PG era and potentially risk those two players leaving in the summer of 2021. And so if you're the Clippers and you're pretty much capped out, you don't really have a ton of draft picks over the next couple of seasons, you don't want to risk losing a player like Montrezl Harrell that is so important to your team, or at least I think is going to prove really important to their team this upcoming season, when you can just use his bird rights to bring him back and go over the cap. So I wouldn't be surprised at all to see Montrezl Harrell get a relatively big payday this offseason as a result of his play this year. Now, I don't think it's going to be anything crazy like what Jaylen Brown got, because he is a relatively specified role as a big man and comes off the bench and scores well, but that doesn't mean that he's not going to get a big payday relative to what he's been paid to this point in his NBA career. And then last up is just a really interesting player to me in terms of like a case study of how free agency is going to go for him, and that is Cedi Osman of the Cleveland Cavaliers, who goes into restricted free agency in 2020 after not signing an extension with the Cavaliers to this point. And this is the year that pretty much decides if this guy is an actual part of this Cavaliers core, if he's just been getting opportunities since LeBron left because they don't have any other wing talent. I still think that he's a talented player. I don't think he's going to be an all-star or anything, but certainly a productive player, a starting caliber wing in the NBA, and someone that, depending on the price, the Cavs should certainly try and bring back. But again, a lot of that depends on how well he plays this season on a Cavs team that probably isn't going to be very good, probably going to have one of the worst teams in the Eastern Conference. He needs to show value on the court, and not just in a, oh, we're really bad, we're giving opportunities to guys way, but in an actual legitimate starting caliber player that helps you win basketball games. And again, this is going to be the year that the Cavaliers and us are going to find out if he's a legitimate piece of that young core, if it's just a two-man group right now with Colin Sexton and Darius Garland. So it's going to be a big year for him. He could definitely potentially get a big payday this offseason, certainly compared to what he's made to this point in his NBA career, but he has to play well, probably more than any other player on this list, because he is still the most unproven. And there you have it. That is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you all very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.